Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. It is a part of the new play development program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. My name is Caridad Svich. I am the artistic director of the new play development program at the Lortel, which is called the Alcove. Welcome. If you've been to this series before, you know it's a series of chats with theater makers, about their work, but also about life, the world, art, and those intersections. I'm going to briefly describe myself. I'm fair-skinned. My hair is auburnish. I'm wearing it to one side, sort of like in a ponytail, but to one side of my face. I have bangs. I have glasses. The ones I'm wearing today are kind of sort of cat eye, but not really. And they have sort of tortoise shell kind of rims. I have reddish lipstick on. I'm against a white background, but you'll see the outlines of a lamp in a corner, sort of a tall standing lamp. I'm wearing a black top with fake pearls on top of it, adorning the black top. And I am beaming in from the land of Lenape. I will introduce you to our guest today, who's Tristan Willis. They're a playwright and game creator working at the intersection of theater and games, making interactive experiences for audience. Their interest lies in queer trans work and in cultivating new ways of imagining, which we're in the business of the imagination of theater, but you'll be surprised sometimes what happens. I'm going to turn it over to Tristan for any further ways you want to describe yourself or chat.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and give a description of myself as well. I am a white person with really short hair that's cut above my ears. I'm wearing large round glasses and two chains, one of which has a ring hanging off of it over a short sleeve t-shirt. And I am in a very busy kind of office-y type setting that has sewing supplies and books and a whole second desk behind me. And that is the setting I'm living in right now.
Very cool. And where are you beaming in from?
I am calling in from D.C., Washington, D.C.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thanks, because audience has no idea. People are beaming in from everywhere in these conversations. So thanks for making time today. I really appreciate it. As I said before, I'm a fan, and it's such a delight to be able to have time to chat with you. I start these conversations always with the same question. It is the pressing question of our time, of our times, with an S, if we get there, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice, the way you think about it, the way you make work, the way you talk about work with others? Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question and a big one. And I think inherently my fears, concerns, anxieties, and even hopes about many of the crises of our time show up, subconsciously and consciously in my work. That shows up in some of my pieces, like In a Way That Matters is a good example, where even though it's a piece that's very about me as an individual, I also explore what our relationships are like with the other people who aren't human on our planet and question what we can learn from them, including the idea of how to make a life among ruins. So I'm no expert, but I'm always learning. And I think it is very much our responsibility to learn as much as we can. So that is a priority for me, whether or not I'm making work that's overtly about these crises. That's definitely a priority for me. And then I think there's kind of like this larger question in that of like, what place does art have maybe in talking about crisis? And I have like complicated feelings about the place of art. I think art and theater can absolutely be activism. I think that is true. I think there are absolutely work that is activist work and is artistic and is theatrical. And also, I don't think simply making theater is an activist action. I don't think it's, activism in and of itself. I think it requires work outside of the art practice. And I think I kind of get a little bit, Brecht's suspicions about catharsis. As much as I love to cry in a play, I love to read work that makes me cry. I love to watch a movie that makes me feel things. I do worry a little bit that we get out a lot of that in engaging with art and then don't take it to kind of that next level. But there are two things. There are plenty of things that art does really well, but there are two things that in this conversation, I think it does really well. And the first is provide avenues of self-reflection for us as individuals, but also, on a larger scale for us as a community, as culture, to think about how we got to where we are and who we are. So I believe it gives us that space for self-reflection, which is really essential to understanding who we are in the world that we're in. And then also, I think, you mentioned imagination at the start. And I think, art is uniquely qualified to help us imagine or provide ways for us to imagine different ways of being and being together. Ways that may not be new, but definitely could be more healing or helpful when it comes to looking forward and looking kind of through crisis like these. So yeah, those are some things I've been thinking about when it comes to crisis. Crisis, yeah.
Yeah, understood. I wonder if it's affected, like I know you wear many hats, you design, you write, you perform, etc. But from a writing perspective, and maybe from a design perspective as well, if it's affected these thinking about the crisis, but also being actionable around it, how, like literally the how of what you make, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I come from a DIY background, like a DIY theater background for sure. And so I think that already kind of puts me in a unique space when it comes to thinking about how we use materials for design and what we do with them when they're, outlived their use, if that's possible. So I definitely, I mean, you can see all of my crafts over here. I mean, this is a very simple and small example, but I buy used items constantly for my DIY work and for crafting. I very much try to buy used as much as possible. It's also more accessible for me financially to buy used. And there are a lot of great places where you can find vintage items, vintage fabrics, items like that. So, I mean, that's small. And there are definitely ways outside of my artistic practice in my life that I prioritize thinking about like my footprint. But yeah, I think that's one of the ways that I engage with it in my practice, is that I do kind of come from a more DIY sensibility and try to prioritize that kind of, that in my work.
Yeah, super cool. I wonder, I wanted to shift the conversation slightly, but I do think it's related, which is when you started making work in transmedia, and what attracted you to it? Because I often talk to playwrights, theater makers who, discovered that transmedia was something relatively recently, shall we say, when of course it's been around for a very long time. So I wonder, what was the initial impulse? How did you find yourself working at these intersections? I think gaming certainly allows you to think about transmedia in a very specific way, interactivity, and the idea of the audience as a player and all those things. So how did you hop on this train?
Yeah, well, you kind of gave me a great lead in there by working in games, which I've been doing since 2019, I think, maybe 2018. I was already thinking a little critically about the intersection of theater and other forms. And I specifically write tabletop role-playing games, which you play with usually a group of people around a table or online. And through reading a lot of incredible work in theory by other game writers, I started thinking of the practice of playing games like that with a group as a form of performance, because it is. And it's just one in which the performers are also the writers and also the directors and also the audience. So I was already thinking critically kind of about those intersections. And then a pandemic happened. And I think, like many people, it gave me an opportunity to really dive into how I could take that into my theatrical practice specifically. And for me, that looked like, early on, I created a piece that happened over the phone, one-on-one, where I basically had an hour-long phone conversation with each audience member around a couple of poems I couldn't stop thinking about. And during that conversation, we also created a poem together in response to them, which kind of mixed the mechanics of like a game into theater. And I also was really lucky to be a part of the Liveness Lab from Orchard Project, which gave me a lot of new to me historical knowledge about how long, like you were saying, transmedia has been in theater. And I was really amazed to learn that, there were people performing plays online, in the 90s and the 2000s, happening for a long time. And it's still happening. There's a documentary coming out. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's two people who try to put on a production of Hamlet in Grand Theft Auto. And that is something that's happened in other games, video games before, like Second City. Second City, is that what I mean? I may be mixing up things. There's another game where that's happened before. And it's been around a while. And I just was lucky enough to be around some really incredible thinkers and learn a lot about it pretty early in 2020, which put me in a great position to start just integrating it into my work.
Super cool, super cool. Yeah, I think there's something around, the documentary is called Grand Theft Hamlet. It might be out by the time this airs. So for those of you curious, it's really wonderful. I remember that piece, and so I can't wait to see this documentary about it. It's making. I think that there's something around transmedia that has always fascinated me, which has to do with, I think, how shall I put this? In theater, I'll backtrack by saying that very recently, maybe in the last 6 months or so, by the time this year, maybe longer, but there's been a lot of pushback against theater artists working or interested in transmediation, which to me feels very strange, because it's part of our history theatrically. Also strange because I think theater is a transmedia medium, which means at its essence, it exists virtually. Like literally what happens in theater is a virtual experience, which is that the play really happens in the audience's brain. And that the transmissions of what happened on stage are like signals, that sort of reach you somewhere that you can't kind of touch. It deals already with virtuality and the intangible, which transmediation only heightens, right? And so it puts me in the frame of like ghosting and the hauntological, right? So I want to address the hauntological aspect of this as well, because I think that your work, in a way that matters, for example, is very much a hauntological piece, right? So it's dealing with the ghost of Hamlet existing in your work, literally its presence as text, but the text is also a ghost of itself, how it dissolves, how it integrates, how it disintegrates, how it marks the body, how it is a body. So I want to just sort of throw open this notion of the ontological theatrical realm, and maybe, you know, how that's, I think, part of your work, but also I think maybe how it's evolving your work is something I'm very curious about.
Yeah, that's it. I love this question a lot. It's, you know, it's funny, until you put the word on it, I hadn't been thinking critically about like the place it lives within like a greater cultural like relationship with haunting, but it absolutely is true. And I think in a way that matters, it's really clear for sure that there's this haunting, not just of Hamlet, but also of past kind of trans elders that I never, you know, had access, you know, to. And even this idea of, you know, there's the scene where I basically am burying past selves. And I think, you know, one of the gifts of being human is that I think we evolve over time, and we become kind of new selves in that journey. And so I think I've always had this connection and this idea to like ghosts, and the idea that there are versions of me that lived before me. And I think that extends to the idea of ancestors, whether they're related to you or not as well. But also to the idea of like experiences and things that live in the body beyond just the person who experienced them, whether we're talking about like generational trauma or, you know, oral storytelling and how that can go across time. Yeah, I think it shows up in my work in a few ways. It shows up like, you know, in these things you mentioned in a way that matters, you know, Hamlet's monologue coming across being all over my body, and, you know, burying the past self. But it also shows up in just like the structure of work as well. And I think there are a lot of playwrights who are really excited and engaged in this idea, but I'm hardly alone. But I think nonlinear storytelling is another way that I think it shows up, which is like, in that our experience of time isn't linear. I'm never fully, I try to meditate, but I'm never fully in the present. I'm always remembering past experiences or imagining things that happened before me. And I'm also in, you know, daydreaming or having anxiety or whatever. I'm remembering future experiences that may or may not happen, and making space for those ghosts as well. And so, you know, that also shows up in some of my, my quote unquote more traditional plays. One of my more recent works is about a trans son who's trying to meet the person his father used to be, who was harmful and even, I would say, abusive with the person his father is now. And the difficulty in like understanding that people change and that there can be two versions of a person, and trying to navigate how you make room for that while also not denying like the experience you had. And yeah, it shows up in a lot of ways in my work, if that answers your question. Thank you for giving me that kind of that term to kind of cling on to around it, because it really made a lot of sense to me when you mentioned it.
Yeah. And I also think there might be something to the space, I think, that theater opens. You talked about catharsis earlier, which is a word that I also have a complicated relationship with and to, because I think that it's taken for granted quite often. And I think that the real catharsis in theater demands that the theater piece is not just kind of hinting in that direction or wanting to, signpost it, but it actually has to go through it. So I think that a lot of theater is about going through something, right? So as opposed to, it's crafted around an encounter, but ultimately you have to go through an experience. And I think that the act of going through is what can allow for a catharsis to occur, if it occurs at all. And not all theater pieces have catharsis built into them. But I also think that the cheapening of catharsis, as a plot point, for example, that it kind of, I've been having this sort of a little bit of a war with maybe this is just me. I don't know how you feel with this, Tristan, but I feel like I'm like, maybe it should be anti-catharsis. Maybe we should, it's been sentimentalized so much that maybe we should just like try to avoid it altogether, and then maybe it will happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to come at it from an opposite sort of maneuver in a way, because I think that otherwise, I see, I'm not going to name names, but I see a lot of work, I read a lot of work that it's just kind of like, oh, the catharsis is going to happen. I'm like, yeah, not really. Like, it's not real catharsis. It's not really happening. There's a kind of like, veneer of it happening, So I think that, and I'm a kind of old school in the fact that I really do believe in, like, all that stuff we learned in school about the ancient Greek tragedians, you know what I mean? I really do believe in the theater being this place where you purge something and you go through it, and it's like intense, and like, wow, you come out of it and you're like, whoa, what just happened, right? Like, and I think that can be like for comic or tragic ends, like, to me, those are in a continuum, obviously, but I do think that it should be special. It should be a kind of an event. And I feel a little bit like the ubiquity of theater as a commodity doesn't allow for the event to occur. So I don't know if you have any musings in this direction, but it's something in how you were responding put me in this frame of mind. So yeah. I thought I'd throw it back at you.
Yeah, no, that's a really I'm really interested in the idea of what the intentionally anti-catharsis play looks like. I think that's really interesting in our time specifically, like now, because I do think there's this kind of tension happening. I think you talking about commodifying theater is definitely a part of it, right? I also have not just read plays, but seen plays where it's like, oh, this was the part that was supposed to make me cry, or this was the part that I'm supposed to talk about later, but I'm not really feeling it. Eric N, actually, I was in a workshop with him, and he said this incredible thing that really hit me like to the core, because he was talking about how people say that theater online or digital theater, distance theater is dead. Like, you need to be in person for theater to be live and to feel, something, to feel like it's live. And he said, I've sat in a theater and watched so many dead plays. And I was just like, yeah, like, I'm the same, and I think, I wonder how much of it is not having the space to even try what people really want to try, but writing what people think they should be writing. I think that might be part of it. I think our general, like a general Western American kind of culture, there's been a lot in entertainment as well of lashing out at like romanticized work as well. Like, people read it as sentimental and therefore silly. And so I think maybe there's even some of that where it's like, well, I can't just write like a romantic, and I don't mean like two people together romance, but like sentimental. I can't write like this because people read it as sentimental. I need it to be really dramatic so that people actually feel something. And I wonder if that's part of it as well, is not allowing for like the true deep, like situations of our daily lives, like, to be important enough. I don't know. Those are all the little things that are pinging in my head after you said that.
Yeah, it's all good. It's been on my mind, obviously, and also, inspired by your response. And, I think there's also something around, I was reading a little, oh, this is going to sound so geeky, so I was casually reading some Lauren Berlant last night, re-looking at Cruel Optimism, and just thinking about that notion of, one of the things that Berlant talks about in that book, is around how the commodification of heteronormative coupling and that desire negates and basically casts aside other realms of desire that are possible that should be valued. So this is relationship to worth and value, right? And where theater, I think, sits in that, I think, is also cruelly optimistic as well, in the sense that I think that there is a coupling around, specifically in the U.S., I'm not going to speak to the whole of North America for this moment, but specifically in the U.S. around our history in this country, around theater being not central. Do you know what I mean? Like it's never been at the center of the discourse, really. Lawmakers don't stand and go, "Where is theater today?" Like it's really not on people's lips. They don't even talk about movies that way, which is our most ubiquitous form, right? So I think that what I'm saying is that I think that there's something around, and this is related to entertainment, but there's something around, that trifling thing that happens occasionally, that people do, that really has no value. We want it, its only value that we want it to have is a kind of surface value, is a kind of like, does it reinscribe the status quo well? Thank you very much. Thanks for reinscribing. Does it tell us that the status quo is bad? Only if it does it in a very kind way. Do you know what I mean? There's a sort of, and this machinery that I think is also part of our field and how it's been developed over the years is that it produces this culture of fear. This is why we have terms like, in our field of all fields, risk averse, right? We have this term risk averse, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this risk is actually what we do. so I'm confused, So all to say is that I think the theater field is also caught in this bind around really not understanding its core. So you talked about the core, Eric saying something that's at your core, and I was like, I also think that our field is kind of lost in the wilderness a little bit. It's lost in the neoliberal bargain that they've made with neoliberalism, but also in a kind of like literally not understanding what the core of it really is. Like I posted something facetiously, online the other day, and I got a slight pushback on it. I don't care. But anyway, I said, if a real play walked in, nobody would recognize it. And I think that there is something around the idea of recognition, the idea that, what is theater actually supposed to be doing? What does it actually really do? As opposed to, can you grab the headlines and repeat them for me? Which is, I think, where I think a lot of U.S. theater is stuck. Sort of stuck in repeat the headlines, but don't repeat them too much. Not all of the headlines, only some of them. And then the other part of it is, please don't make me think about anything, really at all. I don't want to think about anything. And I think what exacerbates that in our culture is also we're in a culture right now, especially in an acceleration of let's forget about everything, right? We're in a time of like delusion, collective amnesia, enforced state-sanctioned loneliness. Like there's all of these things are happening at once, and I worry that theater's function, which is to go, hey, woo, remember we're here. Like these things are happening, is being kind of squashed, right? And because theater is dependent on the economic, on the economy, in quotation marks, right? So that this false thing that's been created by humans it loses its core because it's trying to stay alive, literally stay alive economically, right? It's the various systems that are in place to keep it alive, and also placate those that are actually squashing it to begin with. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is, I think so many playwrights are probably thinking around this right now, because I love the term of placate with this, because I think this was kind of what I was, I think, touching on a little bit when I was talking about my concerns about seeing theater as inherent activism. Is like, there are plays happening right now in New York that are framed as like about the crises of our current times, but don't, I think, engage maybe deeply enough, or are very concerned with portraying everyone in an understandable light for their perspectives. And I think it's like, make me feel just a little bit uncomfortable. Make me feel uncomfortable enough that I think I've learned something, but don't make me feel like I need to act on it, or that I really need to change my opinion deeply about it. Let me empathize with someone different than me, but not feel like I have to like worry about that outside of the room. And then the headline thing is so spot on. Like, it's the tragic why this play now kind of thing. It's the we need it to be current, which is so funny given the development process in theater right now. People have work ready to be produced right now that is so far ahead of its time, that is about things that like general theater culture, I don't think, are really deeply thinking about, and won't be until 5-10 years from now. But those plays right now could be incredibly meaningful and incredibly culture changing. And instead we're like playing catch up, like constantly playing catch up and trying to find the play that 5 or 10 years ago was talking about the things that just now everyone is thinking about, right? And it's talking about hauntology. I wrote a newsletter about how being a playwright is understanding that you may be writing a ghost. You may be writing something that never lives, like that never sees the light of day, that is never produced, never performed. And you kind of have to accept that loss to be able to write it. Like, you kind of have to say, it's okay if this is never produced, because I need it. I need to put it down somewhere. I think great points.
Oh my gosh, and I also think one of my big concerns for the field, and I don't again, coupled with the climate crisis that I think a lot of the field is ignoring as well, because they're not adapting and evolving, is, I think, how can I say this without quoting someone? I'll say it this way, which is that I spoke to someone the other day who said, I think the best thing theater can do right now is partner with movie companies and with streaming services, and that the streaming services will just kind of like guide what the theater is doing. And I'm like, but like, I have nothing against the streaming service or the movie company. Like, partnerships are beautiful and can lead to amazing collaborations, but I just think that there might be something lost along the way. About, again, it goes back to this idea of what the core of what we do, right? So what is it that we're actually doing? It should be uniquely itself. And I think this, and I think to Eric N's point, I think I felt this, of course, as well, is that I feel like I've seen a lot of dead theater when I've been like in person seeing something, and I've seen stuff that's incredibly alive, like when it's across the screen from me, happening either in real time, or even, I'm really fascinated by on demand, and I'm really fascinated by the audience's relationship to on demand experiences, because I think that they get poo-pooed a lot, I think, in our field, is like, well, what was that? It wasn't a real thing. I have to tell you, I've seen some stuff on demand, and I know it's a recording. Like, I know it's not happening at the moment. Like, I'm not an idiot, right? You know what I mean? I think there's also this discussion of like, well, it's not happening in the moment. It's not a thing. But I've seen stuff that's been, the capture has been so exquisite, has been so strong, and the material is so good. Like, it's just so like dynamic. Literally, like, I just remember I saw, you know, I can name this one because it's really old and it speaks to something kind of unique, which is, and I'm sure you've seen it, and if you haven't, Tristan, just go to the website and like check it out. But so there's a recording from 1972, is it? Oh my gosh. Okay. So it's a recording of Richard Schechner's production of Sam Shepard's Tooth of Crime, the original production. And you can see it on the Hemispheric Institute has it as something you can just watch online. So it's Spalding Gray, you know what I mean? It's like all these people. And you know, it's, and they say at the front end of it, part of the recording is not very good. You know, they kind of do a disclaimer at the top about the quality of the thing, and that some scenes they couldn't capture very well. Like, literally, I was on the edge of my seat. Like, I mean, part of it has to do with that play, which is such a wild and incredible play, but also I was just like, it felt like I was just like, my heart, and I stood up and I was applauding. And I know this is something that happened all these years ago. To me, it feels more alive than something I saw sometimes, you know, at a venue, right? Like, it's literally transmitting its aliveness through the screen in such a palpable way. And so I don't diminish even the on-demand form, which I think that some people do, and whether it be for archival reasons or whether it be for just to communicate with an audience. There's also something about digital work is that I think that whether it's digital native or, you know, this idea of a performance capture is that it actually lets people know what we do. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of people have no idea what we do. You know, like, look, this is theater. This can be theater. You know what I mean? And I think that it opens up, I think, the conversation, because I think that I have nothing against musicals. Like, they're amazing, an art form. But it is the one art form that from the theater world, that people sort of know, right? Like, they have some idea of like what it is. It's either that or Christmas Carol, right? Whatever version of Christmas Carol they've seen somewhere, the thousands of versions that exist. So I think that, hey, look, there's something else that we also do, you know. And for me, that can be very exciting, both from a pedagogical standpoint, but also just from like, don't you want more theater goers? Like, isn't that the whole point? People keep talking about where's the audience, and I'm like, dude, you have to cultivate an audience. So. Right. In this direction.
Yeah, and I think it completely, to dismisses so many people who do not have access to in-person and live theater. Like, I grew up, I was a kid in small town Texas, convinced I liked theater, who didn't get to go see plays. Like, I was not able to see many plays. The first like professional quote unquote production I saw, I was in high school maybe. And I had loved theater since I was in middle school. Like, it really dismisses people to say that, you know, we shouldn't have this and that it can't be meaningful. And I say that now as a person who is, you know, a high risk for negative effects from COVID, who has to be really careful about what I choose to do in person. And it's really heartbreaking to me how quickly we decided to leave so many people behind as soon as we had the ability to go back in person, and how quickly we dismissed, you know, these things that we clearly were able to do. And I agree with you. I've seen pre-recorded plays that have moved me more than the ones I sat in person in the audience for. And it's, I don't know, it brings me to something I've been thinking a lot around transmedia as well, which is like, I'm just tired of the question of like, is it theater? Like, or what counts as theater? That's the most boring question anyone can ask. Like, does it move you? Did you learn something? Like, I don't care if it's theater at this point. And Yeah, there's something you said too about archives, which I've been thinking about. I'll show my nerdiness that I've been thinking about a lot because I was rereading Rebecca Schneider. I don't know the full book it's in, but there's an essay called I think it's Performance Remains, or In the Meantime Performance Remains, I think maybe is the whole thing. And Schneider has this incredible argument about how archives inherently decide, like the presence of an archive says that there are things that are worth being here and there are things that aren't. And that in and of itself is kind of a fraught kind of position, but also the body is an archive. And those experiences, I think, really speak to that. Like, and even the memories of the early pandemic, I think, really speak to that. Having access to performance during that time was really meaningful for people. And to dismiss it now is, I don't know, it's, I can't find a good word for it, but it's heartbreaking to me, I guess, at least. So.
Yeah, well, fellow heartbreaker here, because I think about, like, first of all, the incredible, when theaters started opening their vaults, and literally they were like, hey, there's this production from, I don't know, 1980, or there's like Bertolt Brecht directed Mother Courage, 1954, here's the recording. It's like, why wasn't this accessible before? Like, why were you hiding this? Why was this in a vault? Like, and it's clear that it's there, right? Like to communicate. I mean, what we do, we're communicators, right? So I feel like, in a sense, to stop the flow of communication, I think, is also communication and access. Also, weirdly, ironically, I think, combined with, disinformation networks, and like that there's something around this idea of, like, let's not give people communication and access, let's control what they, and let's only limit what is available to them, is also linked to more nefarious, right? More nefarious, more movements around marginalization of the population, of populations, who gets to be part of the conversation and not, and all of that. And I think that, and in fact, in a weird sense, sadly, defining who your audience is, right? Like just saying, my audience is only these people that are here, and like go to the thing and like buy the thing, and like, I'm like, and I think that one of the incredible things that was happening, despite the tragic nature of COVID, is that in this kind of theatrical bubble that we were in, when we could, it actually bust open the idea of who the audience was. Yeah. Because suddenly it was like somebody was like, hey, I'm going to check this out. I don't even know. Hey, what's this? Like, I think a lot of people gravitated toward the theater, or an event, or whatever they thought it was going to be. Sometimes there was a star in it or whatever, like, you know what I mean? And so, and in fact, and also people found themselves welcome, which I think a lot of our in-person experiences do not welcome audiences, actually, historically exclude them for any number of reasons. I can't tell you, this is my little soapbox, but so preaching to the choir, but I will say, I cannot stand the fact that, yesterday I go down a calendar list for a show, and it was like, there's one audio described show, there's one that has and one maybe that has some access, and I'm just like, they should all be accessible. It should be for, like, if you're really going to be for everyone, it should be for everyone. What are you doing, right? And why does this date at 7 p.m. is the only date that that can be the audio described performance, or that date is the only one that's the ASL? Like, does that mean the deaf community, hard of hearing community, can only come on that day? Like, you've made an arrangement with them? Did you call them up? Did you know that they were available on that day? Like, I just think, again, it's around gatekeeping and policing audiences, which I think that, this medium, in its many facets, phone theater, phone theater, right? Theater on your phone. Like there's all different kinds of ways of thinking about how to engage with an audience. All these different engagements actually bust open the idea of who is available, who actually can have access, and what are the means by which they can have access to. So I just want to throw that out there. You were based in D.C. at the moment, even though you're originally from Texas. You're not in Texas at the moment. I wanted to get to this question because I think D.C. gets ignored sometimes as a region, and it's an incredible theater scene, by the way. And I wanted to know what it feels like to be a DC theater maker.
Yeah, I love DC. I don't know if I'll ever leave at this point. I've only been here 10 years, I think. Yeah, I think it's 10 years this year. And it has been a really meaningful experience for me. And I think it's like any region in that I wouldn't say that there's like a DC theater community that's everybody in the community. I think there are absolutely, sub-communities within the greater DC theater. And I have found lots of homes within those for sure. I think there are some incredible individual artists who are doing a lot of great work, a lot of multidisciplinary artists in DC who I really admire, who are also working in like transmedia and interactive work. And I am really impressed by what I see from other people in DC. And I was really lucky. I ran a mentoring program for theater practitioners for 6 years. And during the course of that, I just got to see, I met so many people through that who are so dedicated and so excited by theater and so forward thinking about what theater is and what it can be on so many levels. And yeah, I think all of that is true. And also, I think DC suffers from some of the same things plenty of other regions do, including, I think it's really hard to get cast and produced in DC by like the more established, some air quotes here, more established theaters if you haven't been in places like New York or Chicago first. But there are so many other avenues to creating work that I think I don't want to undersell how important and like amazing those are. I guess the last thing I'll say about DC, just as my little spiel here, is it's really interesting living in DC and then seeing how other people refer to DC and how people want to talk about it as like a city of politicians and kind of that kind of nonsense when it's really not the case. A bunch of politicians work here and so few of them actually live in DC proper. DC itself is a much different city than that. And I don't know, that's shown up a little bit in how, maybe some people assessing my work think about me, and I think probably other people in DC. I've definitely had people who are like, Tristan needs to get out of DC and see some other parts of the country. And I'm like, well, I'm from Texas. like, what are you talking about? What do you think my perspective is here because I'm in DC? I think there's a lot of assumptions around what DC is. And I think for a long time, not just in theater, but the people of DC in general have really pushed back against what those assumptions are. Yeah, I love it. I love, the people I've met here, the people I work with here. I think it's a really incredible space to make work in many different ways, including self-producing work. So
Yeah. I just think, I know that there are those big venues that people sometimes do talk about, but so more power to them, whatever. But I also think that it's important to recognize that there's an incredible network of artists making work in DC, and I think that they don't always get the shout out from national press, and all the love. So I just think it's important to lift up because, for whoever's watching this, the 2 or 5 people who are watching this someday may know that DC is not like the land of just, people in the Capitol, or you know what I mean? Like, it's not just like a place of suits and people
Right.
running around with suits and brokering deals with one another. But there's other kinds of life that's happening in that city, and that's quite vibrant, and I think important to recognize. So
Absolutely.
yeah, the city of the suits. Also, DC is not a state.
No.
And I think that we got to talk about the people who have no representation. Do you know what I mean? Who are living there and going about their daily and like doing the thing. So important to lift them up.
I would love to feel like my vote counted. That would be really great. I would love to feel like it did.
Please count my vote. I know. One day, please. One can dream, right? For true democracy. So here we are. We're almost at time. It's been such a delight chatting with you, Tristan. I hope people check out Tristan's website. Check out their work. They're amazing. Follow them. It's always inspiring to be in your presence. What I will do is I'll sign off here, and I'll stay a little bit online with you just for some final goodbyes. But for the audience that's out there, thanks. This has been Conversations from the Alcove. Check out the series in full. First season. This is part of the second season if you're watching, when you watch this, and more to come. So yay, I'll do my little wave and I'll hit end recording.